Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know how much we love bringing you the latest and greatest from the world of archaeology. Well, today we're diving into something really special.
That's right. We're talking about Tel Lachish.
Yeah, Tel Lachish. It's a site that just oozes history. It was a key city in the ancient kingdom of Judea. And the really exciting part, we've got some absolutely fresh intel to share with you, straight from the archaeologists working there right now.
Yeah, just yesterday, March 26, 2025, our team was lucky enough to catch some fascinating discussions happening right there on site.
That's right, so we're talking cutting-edge stuff. No dusty old textbooks here.
Nope. And we've gone through all the notes, the theories, the interpretations, and we're ready to bring you the highlights.
Basically, we're going to break down what makes Tel Lachish so historically and strategically important. And if you're thinking, tell what? Well, a tell is basically a giant mound formed over centuries, even millennia, of people living and rebuilding on the same spot.
And Tel Lachish is a prime example,
Yeah.
like a layer cake of history, all stacked up.
A delicious layer cake of history. But we're not just serving up facts. We want you to feel like you're right there with the archaeologists, uncovering the secrets of Lachish.
So buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride.
So let's start with a real showstopper, something that really grabs your attention when you first see it. The gate complex at Lachish.
Now, when you hear city gate, you might picture a simple archway, right?
Like a medieval gate.
But this is no ordinary gate. This thing is massive.
Yeah, it's a six-chambered behemoth.
And it's been a treasure trove of finds for archaeologists. We're talking major discoveries, first from the excavations by Tel Aviv University in the 80s, and more recently from a project back in 2016. They've really helped us understand just how important this gate was to the city.
And what's amazing is that they haven't just dug it up, they've actually reconstructed a good chunk of it.
It's pretty incredible. They used something like 15,000 brand new stones, all cut and shaped using the same methods as the originals, and the result.
Well, they managed to rebuild about two-thirds of the surviving walls to their original height.
Talk about dedication to preserving history.
So we have this huge, impressive gate. But the question is, what was its purpose? Was it just for defense?
Well, that's what you might assume, but the archaeologists are starting to think it might have served a dual purpose.
And what's the other possible function they're looking at?
Get this. A religious temple complex.
Right there in the city gate. That's a bold claim.
It is, but there's evidence to support it. They found signs of priestly activity, even hints of tax collection happening within the gate complex. It's almost as if the sacred and the secular were intertwined in this one central location.
It definitely challenges our typical image of a city gate. So maybe it wasn't just a military checkpoint. It could have been a place where religion, administration, and even the city's economy all converged.
Exactly, a true hub of activity. Of course, some scholars still argue that its primary role was defensive, and to be fair, it was heavily fortified.
So maybe it was a bit of both. A heavily guarded entrance that also housed important religious and civic functions. Kind of a multi-purpose space.
Right. And that multi-layered aspect is what makes Tel Lachish so fascinating to study.
Absolutely. Now, unearthing these ancient structures is one thing, but preserving them for future generations, that's a whole other challenge.
No kidding. It's a constant battle against the elements, time, you name it, and funding is always a factor.
So what happens when you uncover something amazing, but you don't have the immediate resources to preserve it properly?
Well, you improvise. That's what they had to do back in 2016 when they re-excavated the gate. Big-time funding for permanent preservation wasn't there yet.
So they had to think on their feet. What kind of temporary measures did they take?
Well, it's pretty much a scramble. They used whatever they could. Nylon sheets, wood frames, gravel, anything to shield those exposed mud bricks from the elements.
You can just picture them racing against the clock. I mean, these structures have survived for centuries, but now they're suddenly exposed and vulnerable.
Right. And one of the archaeologists we spoke to really emphasized the urgency they felt. They knew these temporary solutions were far from ideal.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, covering things with plastic might sound like a good idea, but what happens when it rains?
You got it. Moisture gets trapped, and that can actually speed up the decay process. It's almost counterproductive.
So what's the ideal scenario for preserving these structures?
Well, the best option, after you meticulously document everything, is to rebury it.
Really?
Yeah.
Just bury it again?
Yeah, that way it's protected from the elements and from any potential damage. But of course, that's not really feasible for a site that's open to the public.
Right. People come to see these amazing discoveries, not piles of dirt.
Exactly. So you need to find that delicate balance between preservation and accessibility. And in the case of Tel Lachish, they found a pretty ingenious solution.
So what was their more permanent fix?
They decided to make new mud bricks.
New mud bricks, like from scratch.
Yep. And get this, they used techniques that were probably very similar to the methods used by the ancient builders.
So it was a blend of ancient and modern techniques. That's pretty cool.
It is. They created thousands of these new bricks, basically forming a protective layer over the original mud bricks. A kind of shield, if you will.
Like a custom-made jacket to protect the ancient structure.
Yeah.
Did they manage to preserve any of the original surfaces?
Yeah, in some areas. Especially where they found original plasterwork, they were very careful to preserve it. It's a constant challenge to balance the need to protect these fragile materials with the desire to show visitors the authentic site.
It sounds like it's an ongoing process. You can't just build a shield and call it a day.
You're right. Even after all that work, new cracks appear, things shift. It's a constant cycle of monitoring and repair.
Like a never-ending job.
It is. And to really emphasize the importance of preservation, they even built a roof over one particular room.
So they went above and beyond the mud brick shield. What was
Uh,
so special about that room?
Well, it was deemed particularly important both historically and for tourism. They really wanted to ensure its long-term survival. It just goes to show how dedicated they are to preserving Tel Lachish for generations to come.
Moving on now, let's talk about another intriguing find at Lachish. The altar and the rather unexpected object found near it.
You mean the toilet seat?
Yes, the toilet seat.
Yeah.
Now, that's not something you expect to find in an archaeological context, especially near a religious artifact.
It's definitely not your everyday find, but its presence there is incredibly significant. Let's start with the altar. It's a four-horned altar, very characteristic of the period, and closely linked to the worship of the God of Israel.
So, a pretty standard religious artifact for the time. We've seen similar altars at other Israelite sites: Jerusalem, Beersheba, Gezer, Arad.
Exactly. But then you have this toilet seat right there in the same area, and that's where things get really interesting.
And what do the archaeologists make of this unusual pairing?
The leading theory, and it's a compelling one, is that this was a deliberate act of symbolic desecration.
Symbolic desecration. That sounds intense. Who would do such a thing and why?
Well, the finger is being pointed at King Hezekiah.
King Hezekiah. But he's known for his religious reforms, for strengthening the worship of the God of Israel.
He is, and that's precisely why this act is so significant. The theory is that Hezekiah was on a mission to centralize worship in Jerusalem. He wanted the temple in Jerusalem to be the one and only place for proper religious practice.
So he was trying to consolidate religious authority in Jerusalem.
Exactly. And to do that, he had to undermine the importance of other sacred sites throughout his kingdom.
And what better way to do that than to ritually defile the sacred altar?
Right. By placing a toilet, even an unused one, in that sacred space, he effectively rendered it impure, unusable for worship.
So it was a power play, a way to shift religious focus and authority towards Jerusalem.
Precisely. And it seems the toilet seat wasn't actually used. It was specifically placed there and buried as a symbolic act.
That's fascinating. It really highlights how religion and politics were intertwined in ancient Judea.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that archaeology isn't just about digging up objects. It's about understanding the beliefs, the power structures, the whole context of ancient life.
Now, speaking of power structures, we can't ignore the sheer scale of the discoveries at Tel Lachish. We've heard it housed a royal complex even larger than what's been found in Jerusalem.
Yeah, that's a big deal. It was truly massive. And it's the largest royal complex from the Kingdom of Judea ever found. Bigger even than the structures in Jerusalem. The archaeologists are pretty blown away by it.
So what did this complex look like? What kind of structures are we talking about?
Well, imagine a giant platform built up with earth, enclosed by a massive outer wall. And on top of that platform, that's where the main palace building stood.
So it was a multi-level complex designed to impress and project power.
Absolutely. And while the upper levels are mostly gone now, the foundations tell the story.
They tell a story of ambition, of a city that wasn't content to play second fiddle to Jerusalem.
Right. And it forces us to reconsider our assumptions about the balance of power in ancient Judea. Lachish may have held a much more prominent position than previously thought.
And like so many ancient cities, Lachish saw its share of destruction and rebuilding over the centuries. This wasn't a static place.
Not at all. This first grand palace was completely destroyed by Sennacherib during his military campaign. But that wasn't the end of the story.
So what happened after Sennacherib's destruction? Did they just abandon the site?
Yep. They rebuilt. A smaller royal residence, or perhaps a palace, was constructed on top of the ruins of the first one.
So they literally built on top of their past.
They did. But sadly, even this second palace was destroyed, this time by the Babylonians in 586 BCE.
Talk about a turbulent history. But even after the Babylonian destruction, the story continues.
You're right. During the Persian period, the rulers appointed by the Persian Empire built yet another residence on the site, and this involved leveling much of the rubble from the previous palaces.
So they incorporated the remnants of the past into their new construction.
Exactly. It's a reminder that history is never truly erased. It's always there beneath the surface, waiting to be rediscovered.
And speaking of rediscovering the past, it's interesting to note the impact that earlier British archaeological expeditions had on the site.
What do you mean? Did they miss something?
Well, it's not so much about missing something, but about priorities. Their primary interest was in the earlier Israelite periods, what we call the First Temple era. So to reach those layers more quickly, they sometimes removed the later layers, the ones from the Babylonian and Persian periods.
So their research focus shaped how they excavated the site and what got preserved.
Right, and it highlights a key aspect of archaeology. It's not just about digging up stuff. It's about the questions you ask, the methods you use, the choices you make. It's all part of the process of interpreting the past.
It's a reminder that history is always being written and rewritten as new discoveries are made and new perspectives emerge. Now, going back to the biblical references, you mentioned that there's talk of a palace of Lachish being the largest.
Yeah, it's mentioned in the Bible, and that seems to back up the archaeological findings.
It does, and it raises an interesting question. Why would the kings of Judea invest so heavily in a royal complex at Lachish? Why build something potentially even larger than their main palace in Jerusalem?
That's a great question. What are some of the theories floating around?
Well, one possibility is purely practical. Jerusalem is a hilly city, a bit cramped. Maybe it just wasn't feasible to build a sprawling palace complex there. Lachish, on the other hand, is on more level ground.
So more space to spread out.
Exactly. But there are also strategic reasons to consider. Having multiple royal residences strategically placed throughout the kingdom would have allowed the king to project his power and authority more effectively.
It's like having regional offices, but for a king. It makes sense. Be closer to the people, easier to manage different parts of the kingdom.
Right. So Lachish wasn't just a military outpost or a backup capital. It was a major power center in its own right. A hub of royal authority, administration, and perhaps even religious significance.
And we know that location is everything, especially in the ancient world. So what made Lachish so strategically and economically important?
Well, for starters, its location is pretty unbeatable. It sits on a hilltop with commanding views of the surrounding landscape.
So you could see enemies coming from miles away.
Exactly. But it wasn't just about defense. Lachish was also perfectly positioned at the intersection of several key trade routes. It linked Hebron in the Judean highlands with the Philistine coastal plain and Jerusalem.
So it was a crucial crossroads connecting the central part of Judea with vital economic arteries.
Exactly. It was on routes that correspond to our modern roads 35 and 38, still important roads today, and all that traffic meant economic opportunity.
And speaking of opportunities, what about the agricultural resources of the region? Was Lachish surrounded by fertile land?
Oh yeah, it was prime real estate. The valleys surrounding Lachish were incredibly fertile, perfect for growing all sorts of crops.
Like what? What were some of the staples of the Lachish diet?
Well, they grew a lot of grapes. And we're not just talking table grapes. Lachish was known for its wine production.
Lachish wine. I'd love to try a bottle of that.
Sadly, we don't have any ancient vintages lying around. But the Romans even mentioned Lachish grapes in their writings, so they must have been something special.
So grapes were a big deal. What else did they grow?
Oh, you name it. Wheat, barley, olives, figs, pomegranates. They had it all. And they were close to the coast, so they had access to seafood and other coastal products.
So they were eating well in Lachish. But you can't have a thriving city without a reliable water supply. Where did they get their water?
They were pretty resourceful. They collected rainwater in cisterns, dug wells to tap into the underground water table, and there were natural springs in the surrounding hills that fed the valleys.
So they had multiple sources of water. And that fertile soil probably helped retain moisture too.
It did, especially for those vineyards. It's no wonder Lachish was such a prosperous city.
Okay, so we have fertile land, ample water, a strategic location for trade. What about the city itself? How many people lived there, and how well defended was it?
At its peak, it's estimated that Lachish had a population of around 3,000 to 5,000 people living within the city walls. Not a small town by any means.
And we talked about that huge palace complex. Did it serve a dual purpose as a fortress as well as a residence?
Yeah, absolutely. It was designed to be a safe haven in times of trouble, especially during those early periods when they faced threats from groups like the Philistines and Egypt.
So it was a symbol of power and a place of refuge.
Exactly. But even with its strategic location and impressive fortifications, Lachish wasn't immune to attack, especially when someone like Sennacherib came knocking.
Right, during that final siege, when the Babylonians conquered Lachish, how many defenders were there?
Well, the estimates are lower for that period, perhaps around 1,000 to 2,000 soldiers.
So they were outnumbered.
They were, and the topography didn't always work in their favor. While the tell itself was on a hill, it was also surrounded by higher ground. One of the archaeologists described it as being in a bit of a bowl.
So they were exposed from above.
To some extent, yes, but they weren't just relying on the city walls.
What else did they have?
They had a network of guard posts and watchtowers in the surrounding area. These were strategically placed to monitor the approaches to the city.
So they had an early warning system.
You could say that. And this network of towers wasn't a new development. They found evidence of these towers dating back to the Israelite settlement period around 1200 BCE.
So they were thinking about defense for a long time.
They were. And they kept using these towers right up until the Hellenistic period.
So they were adapted and reused over centuries. That's pretty impressive. And it shows how integrated Lachish was with its surrounding landscape.
It does. It wasn't just a city on a hill. It was part of a network, a system of defense and communication that extended far beyond its walls.
Bringing us to one of the most dramatic episodes in Lachish's history, the siege by the Assyrian king Sennacherib. This event really captures the imagination.
Right. It's not just a story. It's a historical event that left its mark on the archaeological record and in the annals of Assyrian history.
It's like something out of a movie. A powerful king, a besieged city, a clash of empires.
And it was all about power. Sennacherib's campaign against the kingdom of Judea in 701 BCE was a brutal display of military might.
And Lachish was his primary target.
It seems so. He claimed to have besieged 46 of King Hezekiah's fortified cities, but Lachish was the biggest prize, the most strategically important city in Judea.
And Sennacherib wasn't shy about bragging about his conquests.
Not at all. He left behind incredibly detailed accounts of his siege warfare tactics, almost like he wanted to make sure everyone knew how powerful he was.
So what were some of his favorite tactics? How did he go about conquering a city like Lachish?
He threw everything at it. He built massive earth ramps to reach the city walls, used battering rams to break down gates, launched infantry assaults, dug mines under the walls, even used siege machines and ladders to scale the defenses.
It sounds like a full-scale assault.
It was. And he wasn't content with just conquering the city. He took thousands of captives and plundered Lachish of its treasures.
And what about Jerusalem? What was Sennacherib's plan for King Hezekiah and his capital city?
Well, he famously boasted that he had Hezekiah trapped in Jerusalem like a bird in a cage.
It's a powerful image, and it highlights the strategic importance of Lachish.
Exactly. With Lachish under his control, Hezekiah was in a very vulnerable position.
So what was the driving force behind all this aggression? Why was Sennacherib so determined to crush Judea?
It all boils down to power and control. King Hezekiah had made the risky decision to join a coalition of rulers who had stopped paying tribute to Assyria.
So he rebelled against the Assyrian Empire.
In a way, yes, and that was a direct threat to Assyria's dominance in the region. They relied on that flow of tribute to maintain their military and their political control.
So Sennacherib's campaign was a way to reassert his authority, to crush the rebellion, and make an example of those who dared to defy him.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that this wasn't Assyria's first conquest in the region. They had already conquered the northern kingdom of Israel several decades earlier in 722 BCE.
So they were no strangers to expansion and conquest.
Not at all. The siege of Lachish in 701 BCE was just another chapter in their long history of imperial expansion.
So what was the final outcome of this clash of empires? Did Sennacherib succeed in his goals?
Well, he definitely succeeded in conquering Lachish. After a fierce resistance, the city fell to the Assyrians.
What about Jerusalem? Did it suffer the same fate?
Surprisingly, no. After taking Lachish, Sennacherib sent a portion of his army to Jerusalem. Hezekiah, realizing his precarious position, chose to surrender and pay a hefty tribute to the Assyrian king.
So he saved his city from destruction, but at a price.
Exactly. And the Sennacherib made sure to immortalize this victory. He had the scene of Hezekiah's submission carved on the walls of his palace in Nineveh.
Talk about adding insult to injury.
It was a way of showing the world his power and the consequences of defying him. It's a chilling reminder of the brutal realities of ancient warfare and imperial ambition.
Now, shifting our focus from the ancient world to the present day, what's it like to visit Tel Lachish today? What kind of experience can a modern visitor expect?
Well, it's definitely a fascinating site. One of the archaeologists we spoke to mentioned how tours are conducted now with a lot more sensitivity. There's a greater awareness of the complexities of interpreting history and representing different perspectives.
So it's not just about pointing at rocks and saying, this is old.
No, it's about engaging with the past in a thoughtful and respectful way. And there's also the challenge of making an archaeological site, which can sometimes feel like just a collection of ruins, relatable and engaging for visitors, especially younger audiences.
So how do you make ancient history come alive for people who are used to instant gratification and interactive experiences?
They've come up with some pretty creative solutions. One example is an art installation featuring chairs of different heights.
Chairs. What do chairs have to do with archaeology?
Well, each chair represents a ruler of Judea, and the height of the chair corresponds to the length of their reign.
So you can visually grasp the chronology of the different kings.
Exactly. And it's become a popular spot for photos. People love to sit on the throne and imagine themselves as ancient rulers.
That's a fun way to connect with history.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the kings,
Well,
right?
they've also included chairs for women who held positions of influence in ancient Judea.
So they're highlighting the roles that women played, which are often overlooked.
Exactly. It's a way of presenting a more inclusive view of the past.
Now, for those planning a visit, what are some practical things to keep in mind?
Well, there are marked tour routes, like the RAD route, which takes you to the main areas of interest.
So it's easy to navigate the site.
It is. But be warned, it gets incredibly hot during the summer months.
So maybe not the ideal time for a leisurely stroll through ancient ruins.
No. And there's not a lot of shade or easily accessible drinking water, so it's best to visit during the cooler months or at least avoid the midday heat.
Good advice. What about must-see landmarks or features? Anything that visitors shouldn't miss?
Well, there's the juju tree. Local tradition says it's the tree that was used for the crown of the world.
The crown of the world. That sounds intriguing.
It is, and the ongoing excavations are focusing on the Canaanite temple complexes.
So they're digging even deeper into the past, revealing the layers of history that lie beneath the Israelite period.
Exactly. They've found the remains of two temples from the Canaanite period, one smaller one and a larger one dedicated to the sun god.
So Tel Lachish is a site with a multi-layered past, spanning centuries and encompassing different cultures and empires.
It is. It's a place where the Canaanites, the Israelites, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and the Persians all left their mark.
And the story isn't over. As the archaeologists continue to dig, we can expect even more fascinating discoveries in the future.
So to wrap up our deep dive into Tel Lachish, let's recap what we've learned. We've seen that it was a strategically vital city, a major economic hub, and a center of royal power in the Kingdom of Judea.
We've explored the evidence of religious practices, including that intriguing theory about the symbolic desecration of the altar.
And we've relived the dramatic events of Sennacherib's siege, a clash of empires that left a lasting impact on the region.
And as the archaeological work at Tel Lachish continues, we can be sure that this incredible site will continue to yield fascinating insights into the past.
It's a reminder that history is never truly static. It's a dynamic process of discovery, interpretation, and reinterpretation.
And that brings us to our final thought for you, our listener. As you've heard the story of Tel Lachish, has it changed your understanding of ancient Israel and its place in the ancient Near East?
What new questions have emerged for you? What other secrets might be hidden beneath the surface of this remarkable site?
We encourage you to continue exploring the rich history of Tel Lachish and to draw your own conclusions. It's a journey of discovery that never truly ends.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the past. Until next time, keep exploring.
And keep those minds curious.